all I was paying attention to was the subject in front of me, usually a bird, and it was just all about photograph that bird, photograph that bird.
And the goal was to shoot it so that the head, the eye, the bill are all sharp, which this one is, and then I just wanted it to melt away after that.
Hey, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining this evening, and it's the episode you've all been waiting for. We've had the most requests by far for this episode. It's the gear episode, so we're going to talk a lot of things wildlife photography gear related, all the way from, obviously cameras and lenses through clothing and different supports that we use, different hides and all kinds of stuff. So I'm going to kick it over to Scott real quick and let him talk a little bit more about what we're going to do today.
Yeah, so just a couple things. We have had a lot of requests. We always like comments. We do anticipate a lot of questions and comments with this one. So, just kind of be patient. We'll backtrack a little bit. We may jump around. We have a sequence. We've also gotten a lot of requests for video and kind of sharing that. So we did some video. Hopefully it's not too embarrassing for me and Ray, but we put some together. Hopefully you guys will like that. We're actually physically showing what we do, and we've got some other examples laid out. Just also a reminder, all of the YouTube videos are available at Wildlife Inspired, so head over to YouTube, subscribe to that if you're not already subscribed, and we're getting some really great feedback, and again, we really appreciate all the feedback. Yeah, we really appreciate the feedback. So we're going to start kind of from the beginning. We're going to talk through camera bodies, advanced to lenses. We're going to talk about what we use as accessories for those. And to get started, I'm just going to start with my camera body and what I use. Both Ray and I are Nikon shooters. I've evolved kind of from the beginning where I shot with a D7000, which was their top crop sensor body. They kind of had a couple evolutions of the D7000, and then they introduced the D500, which was a really significant improvement on their kind of a bridge line. It's still a crop body. Ray's going to do some examples of crop, and I'm going to do some examples of crop where we show what is the difference between a crop and a full frame. But without getting into depth, I will tell you the advantages that one of the things I really love about the D500. Over the D7000 series, it advanced the frame rate and the buffer significantly. So on my old D7000 series, I had two of those. The quality on those, by the way, is very good. Somebody on a budget, if you're looking for a kind of a value body, the D7000 is really, as at a used body, is a great value. But it only shoots 5 or 6 frames a second, and it buffers out a little quicker. Anyone who's shooting wildlife, I will tell you, avoid the D7100. Although it has more megapixels, the buffer is considerably smaller and it fills faster because of those megapixels. And you do not get very many shots before it starts to buffer out. So if anybody doesn't understand buffering, just read about that. But most of you have probably experienced it already. So just in terms of the D500, I'm really satisfied with it. I love it. At some point, I'll be going to a full frame body, but I'm not really in a rush because the crop sensor offers some advantages. We're going to talk about the difference you're going to hear people say like crop sensors offer you more reach. Ray's going to actually explain that a little bit with a live video. So just overall, that's the body that I use. I have a backup body. It's my D7200. I don't use it nearly as much. And the huge advantages over the 500 are the increased frame rate at 10 frames per second, which is about as much as you need realistically. Yeah. And the increased buffer size. I can rattle off a bunch of pictures before that buffer starts to kick in.
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, I shoot a Nikon D4S. Prior to that, I was shooting a D3S, and one of the things I really want to talk about is the difference between full frame and the crop sensor as far as reach goes. So I recorded this video, and hopefully it explains things a little bit more. And I do apologize ahead of time if you need to turn your volume up. You may the audio might be a little bit lower, but hopefully you guys can hear it fine. So here's this video about full frame versus crop. So I really want to talk about full frame versus crop sensors, especially in regarding wildlife photography. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there. You always hear terms like effective focal length and crop sensors give you more reach, and I wanted to visually show how that is and isn't necessarily true. So right now you're looking through the viewfinder of my full frame camera. This is a Nikon D4S, and you can see the entire frame right there. And what I want to show you is how a crop sensor would appear mounted on this same exact lens. So this is a 300mm lens, and we're just looking at a static, image out my window here. And if I change this to show you visually, that's what it would look like if you were to mount a crop sensor camera to this exact same setup without moving. So if I had this lens on a tripod and I walked up to the same scene and put a crop sensor body on it, let's say like a Nikon D500, the light area is what you would see through your viewfinder. The darkened out area is outside of your view. So you can see how a crop sensor camera is going to show you less of this scene than the full frame sensor. But notice this, nothing changed. Nothing got closer, nothing was magnified more. The relationship of the in-focus branch compared to the background branches didn't change. So absolutely nothing changed. So, you hear this effective focal length, and the concept is that with a crop sensor body, you're getting a longer focal length. But in reality, if I actually mounted, let's say, a 500mm lens to this, a lot would change. The leaves would get magnified and become much closer, and the background would become more out of focus with the same f-stop because of that relationship difference due to more magnification. But all things equal, same lens with a full frame sensor and a crop sensor, absolutely nothing has changed except the portion of the image you're seeing. So what I want to make clear is a 300mm lens on a full frame sensor, just like this view, is still a 300mm lens on a crop sensor. It's not magnifying anything more, it's not bringing anything closer. The one advantage you will get from a crop sensor though is, let's say you have more resolution, more pixels in this same smaller area than you do on this full frame area. Well, now you're kind of getting more magnification because you're putting more pixels in this same area, which mean a little bit more detail in that same area, and you can probably crop in a little bit more and enlarge a little bit more. So it's not to say that there is no advantage to a crop sensor camera, but I just hopefully was able to show that a crop sensor camera doesn't actually magically make a 300mm lens become whatever the effective focal length would be when you multiply that out. It just narrows your field of view. So hopefully that makes sense. I thought this would be a fun way to show it. All right, cool. So yeah, hopefully that made sense for everybody and kind of visually showed the difference between full frame and a crop body and how that actually applies to the focal length. So advantages and disadvantages. Disadvantages of full frame, definitely way more expensive. And also in the Pro body line, they're definitely a heavier camera. So the D4S, the D5 currently, Canon's 1DX series, they're all a larger bodied camera, so they're heavier, and that may certainly be an issue to some of you. So heavier, more expensive are definitely somewhat of a disadvantage. Advantages are usually all the bells and whistles are there. Most of these cameras, especially the top of the line flagship models on any make, have everything that you could possibly ever need or want in a camera, which is great. And the other huge advantage with full frame most of the time, until you get into the really high resolution versions, are increased low light capability. And here's a quick example of that. So every photo I'm going to show you right now, I'm going to scroll through, was shot at least 6400 ISO, if not higher. This first one I'm showing you right now was shot at 12,800 ISO. So I'm just going to pop through a few. There's 6400 ISO, another at 6400, 11,400 ISO. And I'm not sure if you can see in the video feed here, but these definitely have some noise to them. It's not like they're crystal clear images, but they definitely are usable images. There's a little bit of grain back there, but the detail is there and everything, so you can really push these low light cameras a little bit more. So Scott, as far as bodies go, anything else you wanted to mention before we move on to the lenses?
Yeah, one of the disadvantages with crop bodies is that they generally have poorer ISO performance. So I'll tell you, if you're shooting the D500 or the D7000 for Nikon, or if you're shooting the 7D Mark II or the 7D on Canon, which is kind of like their top of the line crop, you're probably looking at ISO values of 1600 in that range. Some people can go a little bit higher and use noise reduction software.
Sorry, Scott, we just lost your audio.
There's no
there.
way
If you
you're
can just
shooter.
hit that last sentence one more time.
Yep, there's no way you can shoot at the same ISO on these crop sensors as you can with the top of the line full frame bodies that either Nikon or Canon, same thing.
Yep.
ISO performance, I think generally in talking to my Canon friends on the same equivalent bodies, so on the crop sensors, I think Nikon might have a slight advantage on that. They may argue that, but I think from shooting with Mark, they kind of indicated that I get a little bit better ISO performance.
All right, cool. So let's talk lenses. Do you want to? Oh, you know what? You're going to show the difference between the 300 2.8 and the 500, right? So I'll start with what we both shoot. Scott and I both shoot a Nikon 500 f4. That's kind of our main wildlife lens, and that's what I use for probably 80 to 90% of all my wildlife photography. So I do want to talk about advantages and disadvantages of prime lenses, especially these large prime lenses, compared to zoom lenses. So, you know, a lot of beginner wildlife photographers tend to gravitate towards the super zoom lenses, especially from Tamron and Sigma, the 150 to 600s or anything in those ranges. Nikon has a 200 to 500, and so advantages of those lenses: they're definitely cheaper, so they're a lot more inexpensive to get into as you start with. The prime lenses, especially the super telephotos 400 and over, in the fast primes, are astronomically expensive. They can be found for used prices relatively reasonable, and I highly recommend doing that. Both Scott and I both shoot a used lens that we bought secondhand, so and they work great. But back to those super zoom lenses. While they can create great images, what they tend to require are ideal conditions. So the lighting has to be great, there has to be enough light, and they aren't definitely the best in tracking moving subjects. So that can definitely be an issue and concern when you're new to the game and you're just trying to figure it out, and all of a sudden the lens isn't performing the way you think it should and you're missing a lot of images. So definitely keep that in mind. The advantages with the big primes are, definitely reach can be an important factor. Low light capability. So, the 500 f4 compared to, let's say, a Sigma 150 to 600 that has a minimum aperture of f6.3 on the long end. The 500 has f4, so I'm getting a few stops more of light there, or stop and a half, I should say. And I'm definitely going to be able to gather more light and shoot in many different conditions. But they also tend to focus way faster, and generally speaking, they're just sharper lenses. So another disadvantage of those big lenses is they're heavy as hell. So you definitely need to be able to handle carrying them around and that sort of thing. So I did recently shoot with a Tamron 150 to 600. I was holding a workshop, and I had a client who was struggling to photograph warblers. So I let her use my 300 f4 with the teleconverter in it, and she started getting some great images. She had great results with that. And I popped her Tamron 150 to 600 on my camera, the D4S. And I do want to say, like, here's an image I created with that. So I fired this one, and you can definitely get some great images with these lenses. I'm really happy with this photo. It was one that I actually shared, and it's nice and sharp. But I can definitely say the focusing performance on this lens is so much slower, and especially for warblers like this that like to bounce around from branch to branch, there was countless times where I could see how a photographer would easily miss a photo with that. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. And now I'm going to hand it over to Scott, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about some other lens choices. So there you go.
Yeah,
Scott,
so there. Thanks, Ray. And the biggest advantage, so I'll take you through my progression. When I first started, I shot a Sigma 150 to 500. It was sharp enough. it does. Some of those third-party lenses, especially if you don't think your images are being consistent. It took me 6 months to a year to realize that the lens was not paired to my body correctly, and I had to use auto fine-tune focus, and it adjusted it significantly. So on the Nikon cameras, you can go from a value of 20 to -20, and I had my first lens dialed in at -18, which means it was back focusing significantly, consistently. And once I dialed it back in, I actually got pretty good results. So that's something to always consider about when you're tuning your lenses. It is something that needs to be required, I think, especially more for third-party lenses. I have not fine-tuned either of my Nikon primes. They seem to just function well at the factory defaults. So after the 150 to 500, I went to a prime lens, but I went to a Sigma prime lens. It was kind of an older lens. It's not very, I don't think a lot of people even shoot it anymore. But it was a 500 millimeter 4.5. It wasn't super sharp at 4.5. I ended up shooting it a lot at 5.6, which is one stop of light that I lost. So even though it was a prime lens and the focus speed was pretty good, I pretty much lost a stop of light. The best results I started to get, especially for songbirds, both Ray and I think we're going to do a video on low light photography or lower light photography.
Yep.
We tend to shoot our songbirds in a little bit overcast conditions, so cloudy skies, even rain. And that's where you're going to notice a huge difference in the prime lenses. When I got the 500 f4, I was now able to shoot and get settings that worked. So my ISO was usable, my frame, my shutter speed was usable for songbirds, and I had enough available light to make it work. So the 500 f4 has huge advantages to that. Last year, I picked up a copy of a 300 2.8. Ray had also mentioned that we typically buy used. I buy used lenses and new bodies. So I don't buy used bodies because of the wear and tear on them and the shutter. But optically, the glass shouldn't change too much. There can be internal problems, but the glass is the glass.
Yeah.
And as long as it was well taken care of, there shouldn't be huge problems with a used lens. Just know a reputable person that you're buying from. And again, I would say I feel comfortable doing it.
If you do your research.
So here's what we're going to look
at.
at. Yep. We're going to look at the 500 f4 and the 300 2.8. So I'm going to show you a couple comparisons. This is a line that I took on my porch the other day. Shot with a 500 f4.
Sweet background, Scott.
Yeah, really nice.
Nice
right?
light.
This is at minimum focus. So this is at 12 feet. What I did then is I switched over to my 300 2.8 with a teleconverter. So at this point, I'm still shooting f4, and you're going to see a little bit of a loss in the size. So I go from the 500 to the 300 2.8. I'm losing about 10%, 15% right there. And then what I did is I took that and said, well, now if I'm going to get the same size, I have to crop it. So when I crop it to the same proportions, I'm going to zoom in real tight. This is the 300 2.8 cropped to the same dimensions as the 500. There's not a significant loss in detail. Then what I did is I took the 300 2.8, and here's the huge advantage for me, and I actually shoot this setup quite a bit. The 300 2.8 I bought for around $2,000. It was about the same price that I sold my old Sigma Prime for. And here's the huge advantage. The minimum focus distance on the 300 is at 6 feet, so it's twice as close. So here's the 500 f4. Watch what happens when I get to minimum focus on the 300. It's a 45% increase in size. And here what I did is I cropped that 500 to be the exact same size, and I'll pull that up in just a second, as the other. So this is going to be, okay, so this is the 300 at minimum focus, and this is the 500 cropped to the same dimensions. I don't know if this is going to translate through the video as well, but when I'm looking, when I'm looking on my monitor, there's a significant difference in detail loss. So again, what you're looking at now is the 500 cropped to the same size, and there's the 300 2.8 at minimum focus. And really the advantage I've had with this, I've had fun playing around with this concept of minimum focus and close focus. It's not easy when I tell people, well, just get 6 feet away from the warblers and you're fine. You get great shots. You get very different shots. They're not environmental shots. They're tight portraits with a lot of detail. and the depth of field is very, very shallow. So you're getting just a sliver of focus, which makes it a challenge. But for me, it's a fun challenge that I've enjoyed. So those are the two lenses that I'm using right now. The 500 f4 is kind of my standard. When I think I'm in a lower light situation, I can use the 300 2.8. And if I'm in a close focus situation, I'm going to play around with it a lot more this year with shorebirds. I haven't done a whole lot of shorebirds, but the waders that I did this year, the snowy egrets and the herons and stuff like that, I shot those all this year with 300 2.8. So those were my two main lenses. I use the 500 probably 70% of the time, and I'm increasing my usage on the 300 2.8. And I will tell you, the 300 2.8, I consider it to be a good value. For a used lens for somebody that can't afford the $4,000 or $5,000 used 500, throw a teleconverter on it, and pretty good results with that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I will show you guys a quick video I did about the other lens I use, which is the 300 f4. So here's that. Let's talk over some additional gear I have here. Nikon 300mm f4 PF lens. This is Nikon's newest version of this lens. I also have the 1.4 time teleconverter mounted on here. This is the version 3 of that. So with this combination, I'm getting 420 millimeters at 5.6 with the teleconverter in there. So you can see size-wise and weight-wise, a huge difference, and that's only 500 millimeters, so not a big focal length loss there. The 500 millimeter is definitely faster to focus, and I still use that as often as possible, but when I want to be really lightweight and portable, or I'm doing a lot of hiking, this is my go-to lens for that. I love the teleconverter on this lens. I feel that there's no quality loss, and it is just as sharp with the teleconverter as this lens is bare, but the 500 millimeter with the teleconverter I really do not like. I find my focus hit percentage, it drops quite dramatically with it. So one of these days I'm going to have to upgrade to Nikon's newest version of this lens, but that's probably a ways off. All right, cool. So there you go. You saw about that lens. And now one last thing we want to show you guys is the difference between full frame and crop body again. So I'm going to give us a split screen here, and I think Scott has, yeah, Scott's got a pine warbler up. So Scott and I shot this image side by side. We were shooting these pine warblers together earlier this year, and I believe we both had 500 millimeter f4 on, right, Scott?
Yep.
Yeah. So we were both shooting the same identical lens, and I believe we were both positioned really close. Scott may have been a touch closer, but not dramatically. We were both kind of in the same area. And you can see side by side, there's Scott's frame and there's my frame. And would you say, did you crop that image much in post, Scott?
I couldn't get all of the pine cones in, so I had slivers on each side. So I cropped that a little bit, but I didn't crop it down,
Yeah.
50, 60%.
Yeah, exactly. And so you guys can really see there's a huge difference here in the field of view with the full frame versus the crop sensor. So, and we have a couple other images to show like that. What do you have up next, Scott? What was the next one you had?
I have that snowy owl on the beach.
Yeah, that's a great one.
The Game of Thrones owl.
Yeah, so here's another perfect example. So you guys can see, again, we were side by side on this one, shooting the same exact bird, and both using 500 millimeter lenses. And you can see, again, a big difference in the field of view. And I don't think either one of us cropped these images at all, if any, maybe just to straighten.
Yeah, just a hair maybe for composition.
Yeah, exactly. So that's another great example there. And then another time we had was, I think you got the Harrier.
We have the northern Harrier, yeah.
Yeah, so again, same scene. This is the same bird flying. It's, a moment different because it's flying. You see the underside on Scott's image and the top side on mine, but this is the same bird flying the same path. And again, you can see Scott's image is significantly closer there than mine. So, the advantage is he has a lot more resolution in the same amount of area. So in effect, quote unquote, you get more reach out of it. But I just want you to always be aware, like I showed in the video earlier, the perspective doesn't change. His lens doesn't magnify the subject any more than it does on my full frame camera. It's still doing the exact same thing there. He's just seeing a smaller portion of that frame with more resolution on it. So definitely advantages there, but they're not maybe exactly what you may have thought. So all right, on to some support systems. So I want to show you guys my monopod setup real quick. I got a video for that. Let me just do that. Here we go. show you that real quick. So there's no rotation on it, it just loosens and tilts. So that's all it needs to do, because panning left and right just happens on the monopod, and any rotation that needs to happen, so even vertical, or if I were to move left and right, you can see how I can maintain level camera by just rotating on the lens collar. So I shoot probably 80% of all my stuff with just this setup. All right, so that's my basic monopod setup. And real quick, I want to, let me switch over and show you guys Scott's monopod setup.
Yeah, I think mine's going to be a little bit longer.
Yep.
The video is actually going to go through kind of monopod, tripod, and ground pod all together, and then we're going to bounce back to Ray, and he's going to go through his setup.
Yep, perfect.
I'm going to go through my setup for actually how I support the camera. The first thing I'm going to show you is the tripod. I actually do not use this very much at all. You'll hear a lot of wildlife photographers swear that you have to be stable enough and you have to have a stable base. And while some of that is true, I don't know that it's mandatory for what I do. And there's huge advantages over the other stuff. So I'll show you the first setup. This is a ball head. I put it in a 90-degree position. So I can use the ball head to do macro and landscape for the very little bit that I do. But in this case, we're going to slide this sidekick style gimbal. And we're going to put it right in there. Okay. And then this is going to allow a camera to kind of pan and tilt on that axis. So to mount that, real simple. And then this would be very typical shooting setup for me if I was on the tripod. I'm going to lock this down for a second because what I actually do more on the monopod, but before I get to that, this is a ground pod, just a cheap one. I think I went to Goodwill, found a used frying pan, drilled a hole in it, put a bracket. So the same system that I use on here, I can unscrew this, take this out. I can actually just drop it right inside here, tighten that up, and now I've got a system that works on the ground. I don't use this nearly as much. I actually just hand hold on the ground almost all the time now. But I will show you what I use almost exclusively, and that's the monopod. Now you'll see that a lot of people, probably 90%, use tilt heads. This one is just a base Arca Swiss style that's compatible. Make sure this is firm. Yep. That's going to be compatible with the bottom of this. So I'm going to place that inside. And then once that's mounted, and you've got to be really sure that this is really secure. It's adding a little bit extra in terms of the number of connections. So now I've got a connection here that has to be firm, and I've got another one here. And if I'm hiking with this, I need to be really careful that both of these are secure. You can see I have a strap here on that's mounted to this 500 and a tether here. So if it fails, I actually have kind of a tether built in. So the advantages of the monopod are pretty numerous. One is it's going to allow you flexibility when you're out shooting. You can pretty much go from spot to spot, and Ray covered that. The advantage to this system is the old tilt heads that I was using tended to flop. So I'll give you an example of what that would look like. I'd be out in the field and all of a sudden it would just flop, and it flopped really dramatically. This one's loose, and even when it flops, it just kind of rolls down. But if I put just a hair bit of tension on that, you can see that it stays in place. So when I'm shooting and I'm standing out there for a long time, I don't have to worry about this, and there's just enough tension I can still move it. So it's really, to me, it's a real nice win. I love this system. Again, it's a gimbal style that mounts to the bottom. You could also take a pure gimbal and just screw it down on here, take it off, and then screw it down on top of a monopod. It would serve the same purpose. I just like this because it's one gimbal that pops on and off everything real quick. But absolutely the same thing if you were just screwing it down. So this is the monopod that I use. It's made by Feisel. It's a carbon fiber, pretty rugged. Same thing with the legs. I'll tell you, if you don't shoot a lot, there's no need for a carbon fiber set of legs. It's going to cost you more money. But if you do hike a lot, it's a huge savings in weight. So if you are committed to a tripod, go ahead and look at carbon fiber. It about doubles the price, but it's well worth it. If you're just doing short stuff like I do, if you're parking in a parking lot, walking at Conowingo or a place like that where you're just going to set up quick, just aluminum would be fine. So this is my
All right, cool. So there's Scott's setup. And I do just want to quickly mention, I hope everyone noticed the lovely bird calls going on in the background there. When we do record our videos, we make sure to, make sure there's some nice ambient sounds in the background. You know what? I missed going over these earlier. I do want to show, Scott was talking about focusing really close with the 300 f4 setup. Here's some real world shots that I shot with that 300 f4 and the 1.4 teleconverter. These are all barely cropped, so you can see you can definitely get some incredibly close detailed portraits with that setup. So I definitely love doing that at different times. And here's a circumstance where on a precarious jetty, carrying a big 500mm lens down would not have been ideal, but I was more than happy to do it with the really lightweight 300 f4 setup. And then whenever I photograph these frogs, it's a perfect lens. I can just lightly hover it right over the water there and get some really nice perspective on them. So those are a couple of examples of when I use that.
And then Ray, I think I have a couple.
Yeah, what do you got?
I was going to show too about the close focus if we're on that
perfect.
on that topic.
Let me switch it right over. There you go. Hit it.
Yep. So these are all images shot with either the 400, which I rented a 400 2.8. I played around with a little bit. It was unbelievable. Or the 300 2.8 with a teleconverter. Again, these are now really tight portraits at minimum focus, 6 or 8 feet, depending on the lens I was using. But it does offer you kind of a different, and one of the things you'll notice is on these, it's almost critical that you get a profile because the depth of field is so shallow. When they turn their heads, you start to get out of focus elements. But look at the back of the bird, how it just melts away. That's something that I personally like a lot. Here's a headshot that was taken. This is a snowy egret point blank. This was a really tight black and white warbler just a couple feet away. These are all images that would have looked much different on the 500 f4 because of the minimum focus. There's a black and white warbler. And again, I love this effect where the head is profiled and all in focus, and then the back of the bird just starts to disappear.
Looks awesome.
Yeah, and that's another one. So again, this is kind of a style that I just personally like. It's not for everybody. I know there's a lot of people that don't like these types of images. But again, it's just something that I personally really enjoy. And it's a challenge for me, and it feels really intimate. All of these birds I just showed are fall warblers. So none of these are, there's no calling them in or anything like that. These are just warblers that are migrating. And I have a little spot that they seem to like to pop up and feed in as they're coming from fall migration. So that's kind of the close focus examples that I had.
Yeah, they look awesome. Some sweet bird headshots there.
Yeah.
All right, so we just showed our monopod setups. One of the concerns I know a lot of people mention when shooting or thinking about using a monopod is, how do you get sharp images? My shutter speed is going to be lower on a tripod, and I can get away with it there. And I want to kind of hopefully prove that you can get away with some slower shutter speeds on a monopod. So this entire series of photos was all shot at 2/50th of a second or lower. So all of these photos, here's 1/100th of a second. And hopefully you can see in the images here, but they're all tack sharp. They're definitely up to par with an image I would shoot at 4,000th of a second. They're all really nice and sharp and clear. And here's one 125th of a second, and nice and sharp. And all of these were shot on a monopod. So with a good stabilization in the lens and a good monopod technique, you can definitely get away with the sub 2/50th of a second shutter speeds. Even with birds such as you saw a handful of warblers and songbirds, birds that you typically think of as fast-moving and nonstop, but in between all their jumping and bouncing around, they always take a second and actually hold still. So you can definitely get away with those shutter speeds. Scott, go ahead.
I have one example. I didn't actually queue up a whole lot, but this one, when you were talking, came to mind. So I was in the car with Mark. And of course, he's distracting me and telling jokes and eating tasty cakes. And I wasn't paying attention to what I was doing. And I inadvertently dialed my shutter down to 1/60th of a second, which is far too slow for movement. However, you can see the length. I don't know if it translates, but the length of the raindrops in this picture they're like taking up a lot of the frame.
Awesome.
And it's still sharp. So this is at 1/60th of a second, which nobody would recommend shooting a songbird at. But at the distance I was shooting it at, most of the, I took, and again, we've made this point a couple times about shooting in burst mode. the slower your shutter is, the more imperative that you use burst, because you're going to capture that 1 out of 3 frames that actually is sharp and doesn't have motion blur. So just a quick example at 1/60th of a second.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, so back to me. I'm going to show you guys the next piece of equipment that I love to use, and that is the ground pod. So here you go. All right, so what I do use more often than my tripod is my ground pod. So a lot of people have made these out of frying pans. I didn't know of that idea when I got mine, so I spent money on it. It's definitely overpriced. It's basically just a plastic frisbee with a bolt on it, like that. That's it. That's the ground pod. So nothing special to it. So if you get a frying pan, just drill a hole in it. I think Scott's going to show you one he made that works just as well. In any case, I do have an Acrotech long lens head on it. It's super lightweight, really well made. And it works great on this ground pod, and I'll show you why. Because it allows panning below the tilt. So the tilt is above the panning part of it. So you don't want a panning head with a tilt top, because you can end up rotating opposite the tilt and then you're tilting left and right instead of up and down. So you want the panning base to be below the tilt. So I'll show you when I put the camera on here. So here, if I lock the tilt, I can pan any direction with it and tilt up and down. So now I can shoot anywhere I want. So really lightweight setup. I can slide this thing along the ground. That's the reason for the ground pod, is you can actually slide this over very uneven terrain, rocks, sand. Works great in the beach. I let water go right up to here on it, so I can actually hover the camera right inches over the water. So I do that a lot. And then there's one other thing that makes this setup really work well, and I'll show you that in a second. All right, so I'm going to show you the next additional piece. I just want to answer a question that came in on the comments. Let's see, let me scroll up here. Mike Shepard asks, any suggestions of when to use image stabilization and when not? So image stabilization on the lens for Canon, vibration reduction VR on Nikon. I personally pretty much leave it always turned on at anything I'm shooting like 800th of a second or below, and after that, if I get up into the 1,000 or higher shutter speeds, I tend to usually turn it off. And I find that, and I don't know if this really is true or not, but it just seems to be this way for me. I find that focus is a little bit faster to acquire when I have the stabilization turned off. I don't know if it's in my head or not. Scott, do you have any guidelines that you use for VR?
Yeah, very similar. If I remember to turn it on and off, it's generally whatever I left it on from the last time I was shooting. But if I'm under 1/500th, I make a conscious effort to turn it on.
Yeah, definitely.
And over that, I try to remember to turn it off. But those are just ballparks.
All right, cool. All right, here's the additional piece of equipment that I use with the ground pod. So the one additional piece of equipment that I absolutely love when I'm shooting on this ground pod, or anything low angle for that matter, is the right angle viewfinder. So this is Nikon's version. There's a bunch of third-party versions on Amazon that work, again, just as well. It just screws on to, in my case, on the D4S, it has this thread on, which is annoying. Some of the other different bodies from Nikon and Canon just have a drop-on version, so it just kind of pops on. In any case, here's the ticket. So I can even be sitting like this and then look down, I should say, and shoot forward. And there's a number of key things that happen here. So it saves my neck a lot. When I'm laying prone, I can just look down and stay like this and still be seeing out of the viewfinder with it lower, instead of being down here and bending my neck up, which really hurts after some time. So in addition to saving my neck when I'm laying low and prone, the other major advantage is ability to look left and right with the right angle viewfinder. So if we think I'm just laying prone here and I'm looking through the regular viewfinder, I can only kind of pan this far to the left, or right, I should say, and this far to the left, and still see through the viewfinder. With the right angle viewfinder, however, I can pan all the way 90 degrees to my right and still see through it, and then I can do the same thing on the left side here. So because I can rotate the right angle viewfinder in any direction and still see out the lens whichever way it's pointing, it gives me a lot more range of motion when I'm looking, panning left and right with a ground setup. So I find it incredibly useful for saving your neck, being able to shoot longer periods of time, and being able to get a wider range of motion out of a ground pod setup. So I highly recommend right angle viewfinders for that. All right, so right angle viewfinder is not for everyone. I will say when you first start using it, it is incredibly weird because you're physically looking down, but you're seeing forward, so it takes a while to get used to it. But if you really want to give it a shot, I'd say stick with it through a few shoots, and I think once you get comfortable with it, then it becomes a little bit more second nature, and you're a lot better at using it. And here's a few examples of everything shot on a ground pod, and the majority, if not all of them, using a right angle viewfinder. So I'm just going to scroll through a few of these for you guys here. So you can see lots of different variety of settings and locations, and all using ground pod that help get me nice and low to the water surface there and allow me to easily pan around the camera and track whatever I'm trying to photograph, even down to something like a warbler. And here's Scott, I got the images of you shooting on the ground there, so you want to just talk about that and why you've kind of switched away from that?
Yeah, so the ground pod is very effective. It's good when you're not moving around. If you're kind of waiting in between, it just sits there. I started to like the just hand holding it. So I think Ray probably, I'm having trouble following the feed, but he's probably showing a couple pictures of me just like running around on the ground, hand holding. So you could see the slight advantage for that is you can actually get the lens inches or on the ground itself. Whereas the ground pod is going to keep you just about, I would say maybe 4 or 5 inches over the ground, give or take. So yeah, it's just my preference. There's no right or wrong, but I have enjoyed it. It kills your neck. It absolutely destroys your neck. So I try to shoot sideways into it. In that last picture, you'll probably see me kind of leaning, coming at it from an angle. So I'm looking through the side. To Ray's point, it really does limit your range and how far you can go with the camera. You're limited to about 30 or 40 degrees either way. When I'm shooting waterfowl, I have definitely preferred getting a tripod and going in the water for the same reasons Ray mentioned with the ground pod. You can track waterfowl all the way around. When I was shooting from the shoreline, like these images, I was having trouble seeing the ducks coming from behind me, and I missed a couple of really great opportunities because I was on the shoreline shooting without the ground pod and just shooting handheld.
All right, cool. So now we're going to show you some of what Scott has in his travel setup here. So let's see. Here we go.
So this little segment is about what's in the trunk. So I'm going to go through kind of how I organize my stuff and what's in here. So basic supplies, we've got binoculars, monopod we talked about earlier. This is a right angle viewfinder. Charger, I actually have 2 of these that I always keep for the phone, and a sling, which we talked about earlier. This is a little stool that I always carry around in case I'm sitting in one spot for a long time. And then of course hats. So we've got the regular baseball cap when I'm out, and the lucky dog eaten hat for when I need some good luck.
The lucky hat.
All right. An extra pair of boots always, and then these are muck boots. I think these are pretty mandatory if you're out in the swamps and whatnot. I keep a lid on this, just like a Rubbermaid container. I'll just kind of break down what I normally keep inside this. So this is a lens coat blanket, so that'll cover all the tripod if I'm out in the field or if I'm laying down doing ducks. That works real well. I always keep a couple towels. There's 1, there's 2, and garbage bags to go with it. So if you get out soaked in the rain or if you're out in the sand and stuff, you could throw your clothes in. So I keep a couple empty garbage bags. This is a little mask for bugs, $5, $10 on Amazon. I really like that for mosquitoes out in the summer. And then I have some waterproof gear. So this is my main waterproof jacket there. I keep a couple lighter ones. This is for when I'm laying in sand, and another one for when I'm laying in sand or mud. So just real easy to throw those on. This is like my main go-to for pants. So I keep these all the time in the car, no matter where I go. If I travel, whatever, these are always with me. I have gone out in khakis and polo, seen something I want to shoot, throw this on, and I can shoot laying down on the ground. So really like that. I keep this, I don't use it a ton, but this is available if I ever need some blind material. And then just spare clothes. So I always have a change of clothes, change of pants, some sweatpants. And then I'm in summer mode, so I've taken some of the winter stuff out. So I would normally keep extra layers of clothes plus gloves.
In here you're going to see some sand shoes since it's summer, so I really like these. And these I keep, this is kind of if you're out on like the Barnegat jetty, or if you need extra traction, these slip over boots, so I really like those. So that's a pretty good breakdown of what's in the trunk. And then I have another bag over here that I'll bring with me. This one has waders, so here are the waders. And then it's got this kind of covered ghillie suit looking thing, so pants, jacket, and there's a hood that goes with that. So if I'm doing waterfowl or anything where I think I might need that, I'll throw that in the trunk as well. So when it's all said and done and the lid's on this, it's pretty organized, easy to use, and that's a rundown of what's in Scott's trunk.
Cool, there we go. Video just wrapped. Scott, anything else you want to mention on that before I play my miscellaneous video?
No, I will tell you that the concept of just having extra stuff around is very beneficial. There was a time I went out to shoot with some friends in Utah, and I was jumping in their vehicle, and I brought my camera, and I brought the camo pants that are the waterproof pants and the waterproof jacket. And they kind of looked at me like, we're shooting raptors today. I don't know why you're bringing like stuff to crawl around on the ground. So I throw it all in the back seat. We get to a spot, there's a harrier feeding on the side of the road. And to get that shot, it was the middle of winter in Utah. There's snow and yuck all over the ground. You know, they're dressed in like jeans and pants and like leggings and stuff like that. So they jump out, and I'm like, see, told you. And I throw my stuff on. Now I'm laying on the ground, and I'm getting these eye level shots of a harrier feeding off the side of the road. And they're getting the same shots, but they're getting filthy. So I always just think it's a great idea to carry some overalls or something to just keep you protected.
Yeah, 100%, man. Anytime I go out to shoot, I always have, I'm always wearing something I'm ready to just get messy in. So here's my last video as far as just miscellaneous gear, so I'll get that started now. So I've been doing a lot of songbird photography lately, so binoculars definitely help to find those little guys and make sure I know what I'm after. A backup body, Nikon D4S, I bring that with me quite often. I've been using this body to try and do some wide angle remote setup for songbirds, so I have some Pocket Wizard triggers to allow me to do that. In the bag also, just a small blanket that folds up real small. It's slightly waterproof and keep me clean if I need something like that. I always have this waterproof heavy-duty mat in my car trunk, and I always have these big tent bases as well, so they open up really big to keep me clean if I'm going to be in a really muddy situation and I don't feel like getting dirty. More often than not, I'm just going to go in myself and get dirty and deal with that later. A couple of extra camo drapes to go over the wide-angle setup, and this is a Think Tank bag. I absolutely love their stuff. It's definitely not the cheapest, but I beat the hell out of these cases, and I've had them for both my wildlife and wedding photography, and they've lasted forever. Zippers still work great, so I highly recommend Think Tank gear. All right, cool. So that is just the, sorry about that. That's the extra stuff that I drag around with me. And let's see, I think, Scott, anything else before I move on to the blind?
No,
okay,
I'm good.
All right, cool. Next video. So talking about the camo throw blinds that we use. Both Scott and I have the same ones here, so this will cover both of them. So I mentioned earlier shooting from a blind, and this is what I use for that. This is a lens coat camo throw blind. As you can see, it packs up really small. Has some belt loops on it, so you can actually just kind of carry it with you when you have other gear, or you can just attach it to a backpack or something like that, which is how I often kind of drag it around. And it just unpacks. And basically all you're going to do with this thing is throw it over top of yourself, whether you're laying down prone, sitting up, sitting in a chair to sit in a blind, completely standing up, it doesn't matter. This thing is plenty large to cover you. And you're just going to throw the entire thing over top of you. Hopefully you can see there's a camo netting here so you can actually see out of it. And I will just show you real quick the opening here for the lens. And it just kind of cinches around the lens so it stays in place, which is nice. And there you go. So now you're ready to shoot out. You're fully concealed in a blind, and it's just really lightweight, easy. It's not too overly expensive. I do also have a pop-up blind, but that requires kind of setting it up in a place and letting animals get used to it. So I don't use that very often just because I don't have very many properties where I can do something like that. But this blind I use all the time. It goes with me a lot of different places. And like I said, you can lay down prone for waterfowl. I use it often for a resident kingfisher I have. I've had really good luck doing that. So a lot of different spooky species it works really great for. There you go. So that's the blind that we use. We get asked about that quite often because we do mention that we shoot from them. And there you go. Now you've actually seen it in use and how it works. It's pretty straightforward, not too much to it. I do want to show you guys real quick. I'll scroll through a bunch of photos. These were all taken from in that blind. And then also I want to mention while I'm scrolling through these, I saw somebody in the comments had mentioned she was glad that she wasn't the only crazy one, as far as all this gear and doing all these different crazy things to get the photos that you want. And you definitely are not. When I was putting these videos together, my wife came in and saw the video of me in that camo blind there, and she was like, "What the hell do you have a video of yourself in that for?" So I had to explain that one. But yeah, we all go through some crazy lengths to get the photos we want. Let's see, what's up next? We have Scott. Anything you want to talk about with what you wear in sand and different beach environments and stuff like that? Or did we kind of cover that?
I try to just prepare for it. I do wear those like foot sock type things, but they have a hard sole. So if you're going into like in an area where there might be something jagged or harsh, if I'm out, if I'm out on the jetty, I showed you guys those little clamps, and Ray has a pair of boots that have spikes on the bottom.
Yeah, I'll show you that.
Really good idea. More of a winter thing, but sometimes even in the summer you might go out on jetties or something like that, or any slippery area. I tend to just wear long sleeves a lot, so I just look for ultra lightweight, long sleeve, long pants. And that's more for bugs. I just don't like to get eaten alive while I'm doing that stuff in the summer months. And then I have a mask that I'll wear when the bugs are bad. I showed you that in the back of the trunk video. So that's probably about the main things for summer.
All right, cool. Yeah, perfect. I'll hit the video here with the rest of my clothing that I use kind of throughout the year, and then we just have a couple more things to mention and show, and we'll be wrapping it up. So definitely ask any questions that you guys had along the way. We're monitoring that right now. So here's this video. So last up, let's talk clothing. So it's summertime right now, spring going into summer, I should say, and not real cold in southern New Jersey in the areas that I'm shooting. So I always wear these really lightweight, completely waterproof, rainproof pants. And the reason is not just to help when it's raining out, which has been doing a lot lately, but this very slick material really seems to help me prevent ticks getting on me, which is a big problem in this area, and definitely concern for a lot of people. A lot of people won't go into the woods and off trails because of that. With these pants, I've had really good luck. That's not to say it 100% prevents ticks. I don't think there is much of anything that does. And the ticks have been really bad this year, so I've actually additionally sprayed these clothes and some other ones that I wear often with permethrin just to really make sure. But in general, I walk through a lot of stuff with these and don't have much of an issue, so it works really well. Next up for summer stuff, hiking sandals. They have some good toe protection, but they're open, so I don't get as hot. And number two, I can just walk through all kinds of water and everything with them, so I don't have to worry about, like with my boots, them actually getting wet or me going in water too deep. Recently I've been wading through small creeks and stuff like that in the swamps and everything, and with these I just kind of go right in and come right out. So they work really great for that. When I'm definitely not going to be in water though, a good pair of waterproof boots. These I will use year round, but especially in the winter. And these are a new purchase for me last year. These are by the company Corkers, and I absolutely love them, and here's why. Interchangeable soles. So these are actually kind of built in, and you can see they snap in really good, so they're actually integrated into the boot, and they snap right on. I just have the regular tread soles on here now, but I also have these that I got with them that have some carbide tips spread throughout the sole, and I've used them on icy and wet jetty conditions. And what a difference. It's made a huge difference. I was walking on wet seaweed and slick rocks and everything, had amazing grip with these soles on these boots this past year, and it gave me so much more confidence to really go where I wanted to try and get the shots that I wanted to on the jetty. So they have all kinds of different sole options for these boots, and they're really not overly priced. They're super waterproof, and I've been in love with these boots. So I highly recommend these, and again, they're Corkers brand if you want to check them out. Next up, let's talk some cold weather stuff. So A hat is always good, but also a mask that actually covers your face and ears really well can be really good in the brutal winds and winter, so I always have that with me. These are some neoprene gloves, so they're waterproof as well as somewhat warm. They're actually lined, so they have like a fleece lining to keep your hands warm. But again, great for jetty shooting and beach areas in the winter and stuff like that, where you're going to be around some moisture and maybe get your hands wet and you don't want to get your gloves wet. Plus, they're also super grippy for the camera and the monopod and anything else I'm carrying around, so I love those. Gore-Tex waterproof jacket. I got the camo one just because I sit with just this sometimes instead of a blind. It's definitely not necessary to have camo for probably 90% of the shooting I do, but for when I do, I figured I might as well have it that way. So it's warm, it's waterproof. I got the same thing, some heavily insulated Gore-Tex pants to keep me dry in the winter. And then lastly, I've been doing a little bit more shooting in the water, so some really heavy neoprene insulated waders. These are 5 or 7 millimeter thickness, I forget. It was the thickest I could find. These are Cabela's brand, and they've been great. I've sat in the water in the middle of winter with them, and I've been able to sit for about 2 hours before I got too cold, so it worked really well. And that's about it, guys. So that's all the gear I have. Half of the stuff sits in my car trunk all the time, so I can take it with me. The rest of the stuff I just kind of bring in and out as I need. And we'll be talking about a lot of other different stuff and answering any questions you may have. All right, so there you go. That's the last of the clothing there. We did have a question come in. Did you see that question there, Scott? I don't know if you want to take an answer on that. If not, I can take care of it.
The one about the focal length?
Yes. You reading that now?
It's not an easy one to explain, but the longer the focal length at the same focus distance, the more compressed the background will be, and it will appear to be more out of focus. I think I said that right.
Yeah, you nailed it. So Alejandra asked, she said her and her friend were shooting the same subject at the same distance. She was shooting a 300 millimeter at f4. Her friend was shooting a 400 millimeter at 5.6, both crop bodies. So she said her friend's photo had a more blurred out background. So yes, that comes from the additional magnification, even though the f-stop is 1 stop higher, which usually equals less shallow depth of field and less blur in the background. The additional 100 millimeter of magnification outweighs that, and I'm sure there's somebody that could explain, or you could find it on the internet, the exact technical details. I certainly don't know the mathematical numbers, but basically, just those longer focal lengths are definitely going to give you a more blurred background at the same focus distance, just like Scott said. So, one other thing I want to mention, I think that's it. Let me just check real quick. I think we did all the gear videos. Yep. Perfect. We hit all those. I do want to talk about and mention a couple things with the camera cards that you use. So almost all of today's modern digital cameras have 2 camera card slots in it, and I cannot recommend enough to shoot backup, especially if it's an important shoot. I mean, if you're just going out to do whatever and it's not a big deal and you don't care if you potentially lose those photos, then certainly don't worry about it. But for me personally, I come from a wedding photography background, so backup has been important to me. But even on all of my wildlife shoots, I put 2 camera cards in and I shoot full RAW photos to both of them. So that way, if I have that amazing photo of a lifetime that happens, I don't have to worry about card corrupting. I've had multiple friends have this issue happen for a number of different reasons, and most of the time they've been able to recover most, if not all, of the photos, but you never know, and you certainly can't count on that. And it's, cards are so cheap and it's so easy to just throw another one in there. I personally really recommend that. And I know Scott wanted to mention something else to think about with your camera cards.
Yeah, so when you're buying SD cards, most cameras use SD. There's a bunch of different ones now, so compact flash or whatever. There's a website that I use called cameramemoryspeed.com, and it just lists the read and write speeds of the cards. So your camera has the ability to write memory at a certain rate. So knowing what your camera can do is good. But sometimes these cards will be labeled that it'll read or that it'll just say 300 megabytes per second. That's not necessarily the write speed. In the camera, what you care about is how fast it can write. My mouse is going to hover over an example. This is a Panasonic. I've never seen this card before, but whatever. It says that it is going to read at 275, which is pretty fast. So when it's downloading to your computer, you're going to get it at 275. When it's in your camera trying to write, it's only writing at 50 megabytes a second. That's probably less than most modern cameras are capable of writing. So in essence, you're cheating your camera's ability to clear out the buffer because your memory card is kind of lame. The SD card I've had the best luck with is the Extreme Pro 95. My cameras that I was using wasn't able to write faster than this 93 per second, so those worked really well. But just be very careful when you're buying cards. Don't buy cheap, and just make sure you're using a good value card and that it's writing at the speed that it's advertised, not reading at the speed that it's advertised.
That's a great point. Excellent. All right, the last topic I have is I wanted to talk about just using a couple of non-traditional wildlife lenses. So here are a few images shot with a Nikon 85mm f1.4 at a local jetty in central New Jersey. It's Barnegat Light. Many of you on the East Coast probably know of it. In any case, the shorebirds there in the winter are very cooperative. So this year, instead of using my 300 f4 and teleconverter or my 500, I took the 85mm just to play around and challenge myself a little bit more, and I had some fun. So there's two images shot with an 85mm. So it does go to show that sometimes you can get really close without having a ton of reach. So there's certain places like this, if you use the right techniques, you can get very nice photos even with an 85mm. And then to take it even more extreme, you can also do it even with a wide angle. So here's some shots at the same place with 35mm. And they're definitely a little bit more scenic, but they give a very different feel to the image than this photo would look like with a strong telephoto lens. And there's one of a purple sandpiper I just kind of hovered over top of that has a bit of a unique look. It's definitely something I'm going to be playing a little bit more with, trying these wide angle setups for some things in the future, but it's definitely fun to play with and try some different stuff. So that was kind of the end of the gear talk there, I think. Scott, anything else you wanted to mention gear-wise?
No, I think we're right at the kind of anticipated time. So
Yeah.
if there's any more questions, feel free to put them in the comments. We'll pause for a couple seconds because there's a little delay. And just, again, we'll post this video once it's all wrapped up.
Yep.
We'll post it on the Wildlife Inspired YouTube channel. We've been picking up followers steadily on that, and we haven't really started live there, so it's really great. I do anticipate we're going to do a test run in probably next month on that.
Yeah, we'll probably make the switch over and try to see how everything goes just working on YouTube. So definitely stay subscribed over there, or get yourself subscribed if you haven't already. I don't see any other questions coming through, so that's perfect. If you guys do have any questions, feel free to throw them on the comments on the YouTube video when we post that, and we're always monitoring that to answer it. As soon as we have the next talk lined up and ready, we will definitely let you know and announce it just like we always have. Thank you guys so much for joining. Oh, wait, one last question did come in. Let's see. Alejandro says, would you say that a D500 and D7200 body are about the same except for the buffer? Scott, I'll let you handle that one since I do not know.
Yeah, image quality, you will not notice any difference. You can't tell the difference between either. But the frame rate is significantly different. I shot my D7200 the other day, and I thought it was broken because it felt so much slower because I had gotten used to the sound of my frames hitting off at 10 per second. The other part is that buffer. So I will answer you this: if you are not shooting action, if you are shooting static type subjects, then don't worry about it. If you're shooting anything that's moving, Alejandro, and if you're shooting a lot of bursts, it is well worth the investment. So it really just depends. I know the type of stuff you like. I know you like those little songbirds. So if they're moving around a lot, it's probably something to consider. It really sometimes comes down to what's more important. Is the frame rate more important than a new lens? Where do I want to put my money? So those are all really tough choices to make. So I think you have to kind of figure out where you're at and what you want to do. And certainly you can ask us offline, and we can help you out with that too.
All right, perfect. Sounds good. Scott, anything else you want to mention before we say goodnight?
I think that's it.
All right, cool. Thank you, everybody, for joining. As soon as we have info on the next one, we will let you know. And as always, enjoy being out there, and happy shooting.